The night was cold, unforgiving. The chill in the air seemed to seep into the very bones of the city, wrapping its icy fingers around every corner and crevice. The streets, usually bustling with life and energy, were now deserted, as if the city itself had taken a deep breath and was holding it, waiting for something to happen. The silence was almost palpable, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hum of a car engine. It was a night that seemed to stretch on forever, each minute dragging into the next with an eerie, almost supernatural slowness. London, usually so alive, was now a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. The buildings, tall and imposing, seemed to lean in closer, their darkened windows like eyes watching every move. The shadows played tricks on the mind, creating shapes and figures that danced just out of sight. It was as if the city had transformed into a living, breathing entity, one that thrived on the fear and uncertainty of the night. Every step taken echoed loudly, the sound bouncing off the walls and disappearing into the darkness. It was a night where the line between reality and imagination blurred, leaving one to wonder what was truly out there. A dense fog, like a phantom's breath, clung to the ancient cobblestone streets. The fog was so thick that it was almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. It swirled and shifted, creating an ever-changing landscape that was both beautiful and terrifying. The cobblestones, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, glistened with moisture, reflecting the dim light of the street lamps. It was a scene straight out of a Gothic novel where anything seemed possible and danger lurked around every corner. The fog muffled sounds, making everything seem distant and otherworldly, adding to the sense of isolation and unease. The air was heavy with moisture and the distant echo of unseen footsteps. Each step seemed to reverberate through the fog, creating an eerie symphony that played on the nerves. The mist clung to everything, making the world feel small and enclosed. It was a night where every sound was amplified, every movement exaggerated. The footsteps, though distant, seemed to follow, always just out of sight. It was a reminder that in this city one was never truly alone, even in the dead of night. The sense of being watched, of being followed, was inescapable, adding to the growing tension. The ornate lampposts, once beacons of warmth, now cast eerie, elongated shadows that danced menacingly with the swirling mist. The light they provided was weak and flickering, barely enough to pierce the darkness. The shadows they cast seemed to have a life of their own, moving and shifting in ways that defied logic. It was as if the city itself was alive, its very essence intertwined with the night. The lampposts, with their intricate designs and old-world charm, stood as silent sentinels, watching over the empty streets. Their light, though faint, was a reminder of the city's history, of a time when the night was not something to be feared. An unsettling silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional creak of a building settling or the distant wail of a siren. The silence was oppressive, pressing down on the city like a heavy blanket. It was a silence that spoke of secrets, of things hidden in the dark. The creaking of the buildings, old and full of history, added to the sense of unease. Each creak was a reminder of the passage of time, of the countless lives that had passed through these streets. The distant siren, barely audible through the fog, was a stark contrast to the silence, a reminder that life continued on, even in the midst of the night. It was a night that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness, to shatter the illusion of peace. Arthur, a man seasoned by time with greying hair and a weathered face, navigated the desolate streets. The night was his companion, the darkness his cloak. He had walked these streets countless times, each step a testament to his resilience. The city, with its towering buildings and endless noise, seemed to fade into the background, leaving only Arthur and his thoughts. His trench coat, a shield against the biting wind, billowed behind him like a phantom cape. The wind howled through the empty streets, a mournful song that echoed in the silence. Arthur pulled his coat tighter around him, feeling the cold seep into his bones. The city was alive, but in this moment it felt as if he was the only one left. Each step he took was deliberate, measured, as if the silence itself demanded reverence. The sound of his footsteps was the only thing that broke the stillness, a rhythmic reminder of his presence. He walked with purpose, each step a reflection of his inner turmoil. The night was a canvas, and Arthur was painting his story with every step. He was a man of routine, a creature of habit in a city that thrived on chaos. Tonight, however, was different. The usual hustle and bustle of the city seemed distant, replaced by an eerie calm. Arthur felt a sense of unease, a feeling that something was not quite right. The city, usually so familiar, now felt like a stranger. An unspoken unease gnawed at the edges of his composure, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, only the empty streets and the distant hum of the city. Arthur quickened his pace, the feeling of being watched growing stronger with each step. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone, that something or someone was following him. The night, once a comforting presence, now felt oppressive and suffocating. Arthur's mind raced, thoughts of what could be lurking in the darkness filling his head. He had always been a man of logic, but tonight his imagination ran wild. The city, with all its secrets and shadows, seemed to close in around him. Arthur's heart pounded in his chest, the sound echoing in his ears. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but the feeling of unease remained. The night was full of mysteries, and Arthur was about to uncover one of its darkest secrets. As Arthur rounded a corner onto a particularly desolate lane, his breath caught in his throat. At the far end, partially obscured by the swirling fog, stood a figure. It was tall, unnaturally still, its form almost liquid in its darkness. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Arthur's composure. He hesitated, his mind struggling to rationalize what his eyes were seeing. Was it a trick of the light? A figment of his unease? Curiosity, a dangerous companion, began to stir within Arthur. He took a tentative step forward, then another. The figure remained motionless, its back to him, almost inviting him forward. With each step closer, the darkness of the figure seemed to deepen, consuming the feeble light of the street lamps. It was as if it were a void, a black hole in the fabric of the night itself. Arthur's heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat against the silence of the night. Section 5. A heart-pounding chase. Suddenly the figure moved. It was as if the shadows themselves had come to life, slithering and shifting in the dim light of the alleyway. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the stillness of the night. It turned its head ever so slightly, and Arthur swore he saw the glint of eyes, cold and sharp as shards of ice. Those eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness, locking onto him with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. He felt a chill run through his body, as if those eyes could see right through him, exposing his deepest fears. Panic seized him, raw and consuming. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears like a drum. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, urging him to move, to escape. His mind raced, thoughts jumbled and incoherent as he tried to make sense of the situation. The fear was overwhelming, a primal instinct that took over his entire being. He turned and ran, his breath catching in his throat. The world around him became a blur as he sprinted down the dark street, his legs moving on autopilot. He could hear his own ragged breathing, each gasp for air a reminder of his desperation. The night seemed to close in around him, the shadows growing longer and more menacing with each step he took. The sound of his own footsteps echoed loudly in his ears, each one a hammer blow against the silence. The rhythmic pounding of his feet on the pavement was the only thing grounding him in reality, a constant reminder that he was still alive, still running. The echoes seemed to chase him, bouncing off the walls of the narrow alleyway, creating an eerie symphony of fear. He didn't dare look back, his mind conjuring images far more terrifying than anything reality could offer. He imagined the figure gaining on him, its cold eyes fixed on his back, ready to pounce. The fear of the unknown drove him forward, his legs burning with the effort. He could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on him, suffocating and relentless. Every instinct screamed at him to keep moving, to not stop, to not look back. The chase was on, and he knew that his survival depended on his ability to outrun the terror that pursued him. Desperately, Arthur ducked into a narrow alleyway, the stench of dampness and decay assaulting his nostrils. He pressed himself against the cold brick wall, his chest heaving. The darkness here was absolute, suffocating. He listened intently, but the only sound was the frantic thumping of his own heart. Had the figure followed him, or had it vanished as quickly and inexplicably as it had appeared? Slowly, cautiously, Arthur peered out from the alleyway. The street was deserted, the fog swirling lazily in the dim light. There was no sign of the figure. Had it all been a hallucination, a trick of his mind? He stepped out onto the street, his body trembling with adrenaline. The silence was almost deafening now, heavy with unspoken menace. Arthur walked on, his pace quicker now, his senses on high alert. Every shadow seemed to hold the promise of the figure's return, every whisper of wind a ghostly sigh. What had he encountered on that desolate London street? A figment of his imagination? A denizen of the night, or something else entirely? As Arthur disappeared into the fog, a pair of eyes, cold and calculating, watched him from the shadows of the alleyway. The figure, still as death, remained hidden, a predator content to let its prey wander, for now. The night, it seemed, was far from over.